And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. Once again, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, as always. And a special program we have today, indeed, on the show that brings, well, an effort. Full-throated, always on fire effort to make sense out of nonsense. So great to be with you once again. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and today we've got quite a show lined up. Mark Cuban, billionaire owner of the Dallas Mavericks and co-host of Shark Tank, will be joining us at the bottom of this hour, and we're going to delve in particularly to his jobs program, also find out what his thinking is on whether or not the NBA will be opening back up at some point, and if the Dallas Mavericks, for example, will get back to playing any time soon. And by the way, with the jobs program, what I mean is that Mark Cuban has been out there proposing the idea that the federal government ought to put into effect a nationwide jobs program, hiring somewhere between 2 to 4 million people for particular purposes. We'll talk with Mark Cuban, delve into that particular idea. And then also, there's discussion now. Might he run for president of the United States? We'll ask that, perhaps in a different way from what you might expect. Then we're going to be joined by John O'Connor. He was Deepthroat's lawyer. Remember, Deepthroat was the whistleblower to the Washington Post that led to the downfall of Richard Nixon in Watergate. He's author of a book called Postgate, and as a former federal prosecutor. John O'Connor represented Deepthroat, to be clear, and I'm looking forward to talking with him specifically about the Mike Flynn situation and what's happening with that, which is where we begin today's show. It is stunning. Judge Sullivan, in the Michael Flynn case, has appointed a retired judge that he has asked to look into, quote, whether the court should issue an order to show cause why Mr. Flynn, should not be held in criminal contempt for perjury. The court is literally asking a third-party individual, a retired judge, to make a recommendation on a motion that is not disputed by either party. Neither the prosecutors at the Department of Justice nor the defense attorneys, neither of them are saying no to this motion, which was put forward by the Department of Justice to dismiss the case. And here you have a judge deciding, I'm not so sure about that. You guys may not be disputing this. It may be something you're both on board with, but I'm not so sure, so I'm going to get a third-party opinion from a retired judge. As Jonathan Turley put it today, the court is not only considering denying an uncontested motion for dismissal, but considering a new charge based on Flynn's effort to withdraw his plea. Consider the implications for many cases where defendants seek to withdraw pleas due to prosecutorial abuse. It would create a threat of judicial charge even when prosecutors agree with defendants. Now, that's Professor Jonathan Turley of George Washington University. Of course, he testified during the impeachment proceedings that we saw back in January time period, which seems oh so far ago. He's also a criminal defense attorney. He's absolutely spot on. This should send shivers down the spines of any civil libertarians across this country. We learned as well that 39 different Obama administration officials, including Joe Biden, the nominee in waiting for the Democrats, unmasked Michael Flynn so that his name could get out there. Unmasked the fact that he was being investigated or had come up in these phone calls with Sergei Kislyak, the ambassador from Russia to the United States. Now, on Sunday, interestingly enough, Joe Biden, he was on ABC News with George Stephanopoulos, and he denied knowing anything more than that there was some sort of investigation underway. Take a listen to this.
I do want to ask you about Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor to President Trump, and the move by the Justice Department last week to dismiss the case against him for lying to the FBI. The president said yesterday that that move is justified because President Obama targeted Flynn. He called it, quote, the biggest political crime in U.S. history. Your former Senate colleague Charles Grassley has added that Flynn was entrapped and asked on the Senate floor, what did Obama and Biden know? When did they know it? So what did you know about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, and was there anything improper done?
I know nothing about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, number one. Number two, this is all about diversion.
I do want to press that. You say you didn't know anything about it, but you were reported to be at a January 5th, 2017 meeting where you and the president were briefed on the FBI's plan to question Michael Flynn over those conversations he had with the Russian ambassador Kislyak.
No, I thought you asked me whether or not I had anything to do with him being prosecuted.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was aware that they asked for an investigation, but that's all I know about it, and I don't think anything else.
So that's Joe Biden. That's all I know about it. I was aware that they asked for an investigation, and yet Joe Biden, as Vice President of the United States, was one of those asking for the unmasking of Michael Flynn. Let's go to Jonathan Turley again, who tweeted this out in the last couple of days. Pick one. Professor Turley notes that Joe Biden was one of those guys. He was just on the air, as we noted, first to deny it. But numerous Obama officials demanded the unmasking, which he notes is fairly uncommon. Notably, the testimony of various Obama officials was recently released, showing that everyone said they never saw any evidence of actual collusion with the Russians. Yet the media is dismissive of the implications. Let's go to pick two here. Unmasking is more routine for intelligence officials, but the involvement of figures like Biden magnify these concerns. This was an investigation into figures associated with the opposing party and incoming administration. These were political critics of Obama and Biden. It should be a matter of concern that the Obama administration conducted such surveillance and investigation of the opposing party with no strong evidence of collusion. The unmasking requests only magnified concerns over the use of national security means for such investigations. That is so well put because, yes, as media is saying, unmasking is not something that is uncommon in general in an intelligence gathering context. But the circumstances surrounding this, that Vice President Joe Biden, President Obama, and others wanted the unmasking of someone who clearly was a political opponent, was going to be national security advisor to President Trump. That is deeply, deeply disturbing and ought to be very disturbing to every American. The media is trying to dismiss this story. The media is trying to say, oh, it's being hyped up, and they're trying to distract. We heard Biden suggest that, just a snippet of that video, suggesting that this is merely a distraction on the part of the Trump administration and the Trump campaign, and nothing more. Because they say the coronavirus response has been a failure. A point with which I disagree. But even more, it's interesting how convenient it is. They were trumping up Russia, trumping up Flynn, trumping up all these kinds of things back when it suited them to try and get at the President of the United States. But now that Michael Flynn, we know the facts of the matter here, what happened more behind the scenes, we understand the significance of this. We understand that this is something that must be addressed, must be talked about, must be headline news. And if you don't understand it, you're probably quite the partisan, trying to simply deride President Trump. I mean, that really is what it is. If you don't think that the civil liberties issues we're seeing here are as serious as they really are, that's what's really going on in terms of the mindset here. Partisan politics at play. We need to do justice right. And that's what the Department of Justice is trying to do with Michael Flynn, and it is very much appropriate for their actions. We will talk more about this with John O'Connor, attorney, later on here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. In just a matter of moments, we will be joined by none other than Dallas Mavericks owner, billionaire investor, and Shark Tank co-host, Mark Cuban, to dive into his ideas on a jobs program for the federal government during this coronavirus crisis and more. And you do not want to miss our intro coming up for him as well. Keep it right here. Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. As you know, people of America, the elections are coming up in November, and I have some very distressing news for you. Very distressing and disturbing. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages. Well, Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. Remember that this November when you go to vote, a Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never. And so think of that when you vote this November. Thank you very much. God bless and have a great day.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Certainly we want to be safe. We want our fellow citizens to be safe. But there is never a time to short-skirt the Bill of Rights.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
In a world at the crossroads.
So these are the auditions for guest host of my new show, Jimmy at the Crossroads. Please step up and state your name.
Hi, I'm Dr. Phil. You know, every pancake has two sides, and we're going to get to the other side of that pancake when we come back from the break.
Mr. Shatner.
Bernie Sanders will probably be the Democratic nominee.
You're going to have to talk faster.
I was going at full speed.
Kelsey Grammer.
Very well. I'll send you all to heaven before condemning you to hell. My little snowy flake, poor little snowy flake, triggered in every way.
President Bill Clinton, whenever you're ready.
Hey, how y'all doing? So, how about we play a little game of the old switcheroo?
Thank you.
Hey, if I get the gig, do I get an intern?
Thank you.
Just asking.
Tom Hanks, go ahead, please.
I am Tom Hanks at your service.
Can you try an announcer voice, sir?
Oh, an announcer voice. Oh, come on. I got a lot of movies to do. Okay, I'll do an announcer voice. I am an announcer. I'm the announcer. Ha! How was that? The announcer guy. Ha!
I think we're going to have to do another audition call, guys.
In a world at the crossroads, at the time of a lockdown, when only essential workers could leave home.
Hey, how do they decide who's essential?
I don't know, rock, paper, scissors, mask? Now, only two men can save America from their basements. Jimmy Sengenberger and Mark Cuban are Shark Mavericks. From Quarantine Productions, the makers of Pandademic and Catastrophe, Shark Mavericks starts now.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger. Great to be with you once again today on this Thursday, May 14th edition of the show. And it is such a pleasure and a privilege to introduce apparently my fellow Shark Maverick, Mark Cuban, who is the owner of the Dallas Mavericks NBA team. He is also, of course, co-host of Shark Tank and billionaire investor, entrepreneur extraordinaire. And I'm so excited to welcome him to Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Mark, sir, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
What's up, Jimmy? How you doing, buddy?
You know, I'm doing all right. How are you on this fine Thursday?
You know, it's Groundhog Day. Surviving like everybody else. Just trying to keep my kids sane and get through the day.
So are you all right with being a Shark Maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. We're a part. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
Exactly. Hey, so I appreciate you coming on. There's a lot I really want to delve into, and we've only got so much time, and particularly want to focus on the economics of the day.
Okay.
When it comes to the economy right now, obviously we're seeing millions, tens of millions of Americans who are out of jobs. We are seeing the labor force participation rate at the lowest level since 1973. So Congress and the president have spent trillions to try to address this. Let's just start big picture. What do you think of the response so far, especially relative to the Paycheck Protection Program?
Yeah, you know, in concept and in plan, it was perfect. You know, the whole idea was we needed to get money into small business hands so that they could continue to employ everybody on their payroll. And hopefully that would tide them over until we found a solution to the virus. Unfortunately, what was approved April 1st or 2nd really didn't get funded. And for a lot of companies still has not gotten fully funded. And that's created a different set of challenges. So now, rather than a continuity problem, we're facing a demand problem. There's just not enough consumer demand. And we really haven't put together a response for that. And I think that's part of the challenges we have to address that we haven't addressed yet.
We'll get into that, especially your jobs program idea in a moment. But first, I want to put up pick 3 because you put out a tweet thread a couple of days ago where you talked about the Trump administration and their task force on reopening the economy and so forth. And I just want to go to number 1. You said, ask that anyone, me, can write a check to the Treasury Department to increase the Paycheck Protection Program money available. Treasury said no. I'm curious your thoughts on why you decided to ask that question and if they gave you an explanation for why not.
So at the time I asked, remember, we had run out of PPP money. The first tranche of $350 billion was gone. And I just asked, you know what, if someone like me or myself, plus others, wanted to contribute money to help small businesses, there was already a program in place. Why not let us do it? They said no, they didn't explain why.
I don't know this for a fact, but my understanding has always been that it's difficult or impossible under the current law to actually direct money and spending by the federal government. So I suspect maybe that could be why.
We asked that question. Yeah, no, we asked that question, and I talked to several congressmen who said no, that would not be an issue, that we would be able to, the way everything was defined, it would not be a problem to accept additional monies into the Treasury because the program's already in place.
That's interesting. Okay, makes sense, makes sense. Let me ask you a broad question, and then we'll zero in on the jobs program especially. I have watched several interviews, Mark Cuban, where you said, I'm a libertarian at heart, but we're in a unique situation right now, and so we need a wide-scale government response. I'm kind of paraphrasing what you've said, although you have specifically said unique situation and libertarian at heart. How do you square the circle of being a libertarian at heart and looking for some sort of a massive federal program?
Because the dumbest thing that we possibly can do is to hold on to dogma. You know, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a capitalist, and what capitalists and entrepreneurs do is solve problems. And we have a very unique situation here, something we've never seen before in this country, and it requires a very unique solution. And right now, what we had another 2.9 million apply for unemployment this week. So now we're up to 36 million people that are unemployed and probably another 20 that are underemployed. You can't just take the old ways and just expect to do it quickly enough to get those people back to work. And if we don't get those people back to work, there's not going to be consumer demand for products and services, no matter how much stimulus we give companies or no matter how much liquidity we put into the system, because no company's ever existed without sales. And so we need to do things that give people confidence that they'll have jobs, those jobs will have continuity, and that'll give them more impetus to spend money. And that's what's going to drive the economy. That's why we need a different type of solution.
Well, we'll get a little bit more into consumer demand in a moment, but when it comes to this jobs program at the federal level, I've heard you talk about the idea of hiring 2 to 4 million Americans, particularly to do testing and tracing and some of those things to address this crisis. Tell us a little bit more about what you would like to see done as far as a federal jobs program.
So there's certain things that we need done as a population right now, as a country, and in particular in order for us to feel more confident as we open up. And one of those is testing, because, you know, there's a reason why the White House tests every day, because they want to protect the president, they want to protect the vice president, they want to protect all the employees of the White House. You know, given that they have best access to information, best access to science, best access to scientists and doctors, I think they're a good model or a template for what most businesses should do. And so in order to do that, we need people who are trained as healthcare workers in order to do the testing. In addition to that, tracking and tracing is a valuable tool to help us deal with any type of resurgences, any type of hotspots, and basically just to learn more about how this virus works. In order to do these things on a national basis, because it's kind of ineffective when states do it, because when a state does it, they silo that data, they have their own approach, they have their own testing, they do it in their way, and that doesn't make the data available to everybody. So by hiring and training people as healthcare workers, adhering to HIPAA regulations, adhering to all privacy requirements, we can hire 3, 4, maybe even more million people and give them good paying jobs with benefits that starts to benefit the country, doing something that's productive and help us push the economy forward by at least reducing unemployment some and creating some more consumer demand. And that's just one example of an intermediary job works program. We also could do it for care, right? So there's a lot of people with pre-existing conditions. There's a lot of people who are elderly who can't leave their homes for fear of getting sick, right? People that we want to stay home. They need support, they need help, and there aren't enough people to provide that right now. So training people as healthcare workers to support them can create more jobs. Now, I'm not saying these are permanent jobs, but on a transitional basis, whether it's 2 years or 3 years out, we do a reevaluation. then we'll start to see the economy at least get impacted positively. And when you have more people confident in their jobs, they spend more, that helps jobs. That creates a solution to the economy problems we're having now.
So it seems like, in a nutshell, you're looking to kill two birds with one stone, where you hire more people so you can put more people to work, but then you also address the current crisis by helping to get some of the healthcare tools out there more widely.
That's the beauty of capitalism, is it? You come up with great ideas to solve more than one problem, take advantage of the productivity, and grow the economy.
Although what I struggle with, though, Mark Cuban, is the idea that this is a capitalistic sort of approach, because, at least as I understand it, you're talking about the federal government hiring maybe 4 million people, which is the government actually hiring people and creating those jobs. That's not exactly a capitalist framework to have the federal government do.
Solving problems is about as capitalistic as you can be. The challenge, though, look at us as America Inc., right? Look at us as one big company trying to solve a big national problem. It's too big for any 1, 10, 20, or 50 private companies to solve right now. So we have to take advantage of America Inc. and get out there and create these jobs and solve these problems. Look, if we hadn't lost 36 million jobs in 2 months, there's no way I'd be suggesting this. If we didn't have more than 50 million people unemployed and underemployed in 2 months, no way this would make any sense. But we've never seen a scenario where we've lost this many jobs this quickly. So we have to do things differently. And USA Inc. is the only company that's big enough to solve this problem.
So one question that obviously a lot of folks would ask, and just a brief answer here, it's not the most important one to me as far as a question, but is how you would afford this. Because if we're talking 4 million people and you want to pay them decent wages, you would probably have to give them federal benefits, very difficult to hire or fire federal employees. We've already spent trillions of dollars. How would you go about paying for another multi-trillion-dollar hiring program?
How can we afford not to? What's the alternative? In any business environment, any entrepreneur is going to look at an action or an investment they're looking to make and say, and ask themselves, what happens if I do it, and what happens if I don't do it? If we don't do it, we're not going to see the increase in consumer demands. We're not going to have people spending money because they don't have confidence. We have to do it. If there were a better solution, if somebody else has got a better solution, bring it, right? I'm not saying I'm the only one with solutions. That's what capitalism is all about, the marketplace of ideas and options. But right now, USA Inc. is the best company we have to invest in and bet on. And I don't think there's a better solution, but I'm open to it.
So one of the concerns that I have, and we've tried jobs programs in the past, for example, the Great Depression. I mean, we saw the Works Progress Administration, the CCC, the TVA, numerous different programs, alphabet soup agencies FDR had in place to address it under the New Deal. And I always look at it this way in terms of the economy. Yes, consumer spending is important, but the most important thing that comes about in order to make an economy function is investment. A big concern for me, let's say that in order to pay for this, we have to tax Mark Cuban significantly more and others like yourself who are investors in companies. In order for a company to actually create jobs that can then bring about spending and demand, that company needs investment up front. They get the money from a Mark Cuban, for example, so then they can get more equipment or get new equipment to be able to hire employees to expand their business so they can provide more products and services. Only after production and investment, it seems to me, can you actually get the kind of consumer demand and consumer spending that you're talking about. And if we have to sap you and other investors who are very much out there, as you have done in Shark Tank and then in your private companies and so forth, what you're doing in that regard, I think, is tremendously more valuable in terms of helping to bring us back from the brink.
So one, they're not mutually exclusive, right? I'm going to continue to invest in Shark Tank companies and other companies, and there's no shortage of private equity. The question is, how long will it take? Now, if you can tell me a company that can create 4 million jobs, or an investment that's out there that can create 4 million or 6 million or 33 million jobs over the next 12 months, I'm all ears. But I already know it doesn't exist.
Well,
I already know it can't happen. You have the Federal Reserve investing trillions of dollars of liquidity into the system. So there's plenty of capital available to, from my own resources and for me to borrow. There's plenty of capital for every major investor and corporation in the world to borrow from. But that's not the hard part. The liquidity is there. The hard part is creating the jobs fast enough that we don't go into a depression. And so if you're able to find a way to do that in a compressed period of time, amen, Jimmy, let's go.
Well, let me ask you a question.
That doesn't exist.
About the compressed period of time, Mark Cuban. I mean, the idea of the federal government hiring 4 million people, you have to bring in all the job applications, then you have to go ahead and train them. You have to go through rigorous processes in order to make all those ducks get in a row. And by the way, I don't trust that the bureaucracies of the federal government are particularly effective at that sort of thing. How do you think that you can get this done quickly enough to A, have an impact, and B, make it so that, I mean, the private sector innovation, what if during that interim time we have successful at-home tests that are produced well, produced effectively, produced easily for people to do, and you don't need to be hiring 4 million people because the private sector
we can play what if until we're blue in the face, right? There's a lot of what ifs. So, if tomorrow they come up with a solution, then none of this matters, and you can stop the program. And I get the whole idea that once government gets started hiring people, it's almost impossible to take them off the payroll. And yes, that's the problem. I mean, I don't like that any more than anybody else. But you have to ask, where are we and what are we going to do to get forward? So will it take more time? Will it take some time for the government to hire that many people? Yes. Can they work within AmeriCorps and other organizations that already are used to hiring a lot of people? Yes. Will it possibly take longer than we ever anticipate? Definitely yes. But if you stack that up against doing it all privately, I just don't see a path where we can create tens of millions of jobs over the next 12 months. And even with all the waste, even with all the inefficiencies that are assigned to government hiring and government programs, they still will create the jobs that will amplify the demand, which will then increase the ability for companies to succeed. And that's what we need, even when you have waste to show. Look, any company that starts, no company is 100% efficient. So a typical capitalistic company that's doing well might have 10% inefficiencies. The government might have 30 or 40% inefficiencies. But even after those problems with government, there's no other realistic business environment or private environment that can create the number of jobs that we need. And that's the bottom line.
I think the difference, and I appreciate it. I mean, you're very much articulate in presenting the perspective. I just don't have that kind of trust and faith in the federal government to do those sorts of programs.
We gotta let dogma go.
But it's not just about dogma; it's about practicality. And we've seen countries across the globe. Yeah,
so Jimmy, you're an entrepreneur.
I'll give you the alternative.
You're an entrepreneur. Sure. You've got to create 30 million jobs over 3 years.
Yeah.
Tell me what companies can do that.
So first
tell me
of
what
all,
20 or 50 or 100 companies can do that.
I can't tell you a specific companies that can do that because I don't know. In fact,
or investors.
But what I don't.
The greatest investors of all time.
Well, but I don't presume to think that I know who's going to be the best investor, the best company to do that. Just as I don't think the government is that I can presume that the government's going to be effective to do it. I think if you start reopening, which isn't going to be an instant process, because you do have, of course, you have a situation with reopening where not everybody's going to go to restaurants, not everybody's going to go to movie theaters and so forth. But if you begin that process and allow people to start their businesses back up and continue to provide some of the assistance that we've been doing, I think that could be much more effective, especially with a deregulatory regime, than having the government do what hasn't worked in the past, in my view.
I wish you were right, Jimmy. I really, really wish you were right. And prior to January of 2020, I would have agreed with you 100 out of 100 times. But this is not what we're facing today. And getting opened up a little bit, is fine. It's a step, that we'll see what happens. We'll find out what happens because, when I look at my small businesses and talk to all the other small businesses that I deal with, when you try to open up at 25% or 50% or even 100%, knowing that a big chunk of your customer base won't leave their house or are only willing to buy online, lots of times it's not even cost effective to open up. And so you've got that challenge to deal with. And so just merely opening up doesn't address how commerce has changed. I mean, in reality, Jimmy, Amazon sales, online sales are booming. The economy is open. What's not open or what's open for discussion is how, where, why, and when we buy. Because if people had jobs, if people had sources of income, you pretty much could buy anything you want online. Maybe you can't go out to dinner, but you can certainly have that same dinner delivered to your house if you could afford it, right? What can't you buy online now? So it's not that the economy's not open. It's just that what's changing because of the virus is how we do business. Then the next question becomes, is there a better way? Because we're kind of evolving. We started off as an agrarian economy in this country. Then we went manufacturing industrial. Then we went hybrid digital physical. Now we're seeing acceleration to a pure digital environment. And that's not necessarily bad. And that also might open the door for us to bring manufacturing of core products using AI and robotics back from overseas. And so, you know, that entrepreneurial side of this country, and there's no greater entrepreneur, there's no country in the world that has more entrepreneurs or better entrepreneurs than we do. That entrepreneurial side actually gets juiced with this jobs program when we create consumer demand, because they invent new and better ways for us to compete both internally, domestically, and globally.
I think that innovation comes much more from an investment mechanism than from a consumer demand.
But you don't miss that. That investment's still going to be there. That's why the Fed, you know, put all that money into the system. Look, Jimmy, I've got lots of money to invest, and I'm looking for investments. But let me just tell you point blank, you know, as I look, I can't look and say, you know what, you did great in pre-pandemic commerce. I have to look and say, what's post-pandemic commerce going to look like? And are you going to be able to survive and thrive and return my investment? That's going to take time. I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows what post-pandemic commerce is actually going to look like. Right. And so going back again to a government program, we're going to have a balance. I don't think you're going to see private investment diminished at all. You're not going to see private creativity and entrepreneurship diminished, but we still need that balance.
We've hardly even scratched the surface of the different discussion points. I'd love to chat with you more about these in the future, Mark Cuban, but I do have one final question because I know we're over time. Sure. There's a lot of questions coming about. Is Mark Cuban going to run for president? Can I dissuade you from doing so? Because I think the value that you're providing as an investor and an entrepreneurial advisor is far better than any politician can possibly be doing as far as a service to society.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, it's a long shot for now. Crazier things have happened, but I think we need leadership. You know, I think President Trump has done some good things, but I think, you know, when the whole pandemic started, he was great. I would give him an A+ for his initial start, but now he's reverted back to blaming everybody else. This is the man who he's the most powerful man in the world, you know, and yet he plays the victim all the time. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. We need leadership. We need people to have confidence that the country's going in the right direction, that we're going to be able to solve this problem. And we're just not getting that from him. So whether it's me or anybody else, I may not be the world's best candidate. There's probably better out there, but I just think we need to find somebody who's a leader. And we need that now more than ever.
I think that entrepreneurial and investor involvement is the most important thing we need in our economy today. But
I'm going to keep on doing my best.
Your points
there,
are well
Jimmy.
taken.
You can take that to the bank.
Mark Cuban, this was so much fun. Thanks so much for coming on, and I hope you'll come back.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. It was a lot of fun. I know we wanted to talk about more, but I really appreciate the questions and the opportunity.
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. We'll have you back. Mark Cuban, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Once again, Mark Cuban joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Fellow Shark Maverick, of course he is, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. Never enough time to have a conversation here. There's so many things to get at. And I may comment after our interview with John O'Connor, I may comment a little bit on and add some thoughts in terms of these sorts of jobs programs and what have you, because I think there's so much that we didn't even get a chance to dive into. But that's what happens with these complex things. And hey, I have to say that one thing that Mark Cuban is very much capable of doing is talking about these issues and defending his points, which always makes for a fun conversation. We're going to take a break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. John O'Connor up next as we talk about the Flynn investigation and developments thereof. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, here in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Don't go anywhere.
Safe, unsafe. Very safe, completely unsafe. Extremely insanely safe. X Games unsafe. Who's there? What do you want?
It's me, Arnold. Donald Trump, I need to ask you a favor. I need you to stop using my quotes and my movie titles in your speeches. When you talk to the public, it gives them the wrong idea that somehow I support you.
I can do whatever I want. I am, after all, Commander-in-Chief.
Ah, that's what I mean right there. You can't just blatantly rip people off. That is a movie that I was in, not you, me.
I can do as I wish, as I totally recall.
See what I mean? That was a great movie I did with Jamie Lee Curtis and James Cameron, and neither one of those two support you, and now you're using that. You can't keep on doing this.
That's
it's exactly
the media true lie right there.
That's what I mean. You can't say that.
I don't know. Whatever became of us, Arnold? We used to be like brothers, like twins.
That's the last straw. I can't take it anymore. There's something wrong with you. You must have something in your brain.
It's not a tumor.
That's it. That's it. That's from Kindergarten Cop. You can't steal that.
You know what? You're fired.
You can't fire me. I don't work for you anymore. I quit.
I want you to get Pence on the line right away, Mike Pence. We're going to send him down to Mar-a-Lago, and we're going to put a stop to this Arnold business. Tell him to run. Go. Get to the chopper.
I heard that. Knock it off now, or I'll be back. Unlike you in 2020, I'll be back.
Get him out.
You know, if I wanted to go around town, take this harmonica, and become a musician, I don't need a license to do that. But if I wanted to be a barber or a cosmetologist, it'll take me thousands of hours of training and experience in order to get permission from the government to do just that. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Let's talk about occupational licensing. Did you know that 1/3 of all Americans need government permission just to do their jobs? And that according to the Mercatus Center, many of these workers earn less than the average income. How can you improve your station in life, have upward mobility, and prosper on your own terms if you're constrained by the government like this? It's called occupational licensing, and it's the requirement that many jobs need you to meet in order to do that job. That is, for example, training and experience that's required for you to get the okay from government to start working.
Plumbers license plumbers. And if you really want to know the real function of licensure, of licensing all these occupations, all you have to do is go and see who goes down to the state legislature to lobby in favor of licensing. Now, if the real true function of licensing is to protect consumers, you'd expect consumers to be lobbying for licensure.
Now, this is something that hurts a lot of people. It's actually not helping people on the whole, according to a number of studies. For example, an Obama administration study found that most research does not find that licensing improves quality or public health and safety. In fact, here in Colorado, where I live, barbers require 10 times the amount of training and experience as emergency medical technicians in order to start working. When it comes to cosmetologists, they need 12 times as much training and experience as EMTs. People who are saving lives need far less training and experience to start working than barbers do. We need to start scaling back occupational licensing because this will help to unleash the unlimited potential of each and every individual. And that's what we should be focusing on. Industry boards that approve licensing requirements in many cases oftentimes promote it because they want to constrain new entries into the fields. They got it wrong. We need more competition and more opportunity across the board for better quality and also to improve people's lives. And in the end, isn't that what good public policy is all about?
Hey, Jimmy Sengenberger. What a great segment with Mark Cuban. How much more Sang style do you got left in the tank, my friend? Jimmy Sengenberger, folks.
Rock Rocking and rolling back. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you. Jimmy at the Crossroads. I think that conversation with Mark Cuban was a prime example of the engaging, intelligent talk that we always strive to bring day in and day out here on Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here today. And if you want to be a part of the festivities, of course, you can tweet at me 24/7, 365 at Sang Center, Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. You can also log on to my website, jimmysengenberger.com. Remember, no A, no I, no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. And also check out jimmyatthecrossroads.com, washingtonexaminer.com, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. So let's go now to where we began the show at the top, which was a little bit of discussion about Michael Flynn and the saga there with lots of different developments that are happening. There's also this topic of Richard Burr, senator from North Carolina, served an FBI warrant last night. It appears maybe they took a cell phone, what have you. We'll talk a little bit about that and more with John O'Connor, author of Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deepthroat, Covered Up Watergate, and Began Today's Partisan Advocacy Journalism. John served as an assistant U.S. attorney in North Carolina from 1974 to 1979 and was Deepthroat's lawyer when Deepthroat went public. John O'Connor, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Hey, Jimmy, how are you?
You know, I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Well, let me give a shout out first to Mark Cuban. This is odd, but I represented Don Nelson as Mark's very friendly opponent in litigation when Don, who was coach of the Mavericks, and Mark got into litigation. That said, Don thinks Mark was one of the best owners he's ever encountered. He was way ahead of his time, and young Donnie Nelson is his GM now. So they're good friends, but we had a real tussle there for a while. That's why I say, and Mark and I had some fun together. Let me just say that.
I love that connection. We didn't have any indication of that when we brought you on, but hey, there we go. And by the way, he just seems like such a class act. That was fun. I know you were watching some of the interview. What'd you think?
Oh, Mark is brilliant. I'm a private enterprise guy. I would say do everything that Mark says, but do it through private companies. Mm-hmm. I much more trust them. And if there is a success in the venture, it will be privately owned and people can take private ownership. It's very hard once something is taken over by government. It's very hard to disattach it.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm a little cynical like you are, but government just doesn't work as a profit-making enterprise and an efficient one. I think Adam Smith proved it in 1776, and things haven't changed.
That he did. I love quoting Adam Smith here on Jimmy at the Crossroads as well, but it's such an important point. We've seen decades of government failures. You look at the Great Depression when we did try these kinds of jobs programs, and that didn't turn out so well. I would argue that the New Deal prolonged the Great Depression. But while I would love to talk more about economics and liberty with you, I was particularly wanting to dive into the topic of Michael Flynn. I mean, now you got Judge Sullivan in the case, looking to a third-party guy, another judge, a retired judge, to give him advice on how to proceed on an uncontested motion to dismiss this case. John O'Connor, you were a federal prosecutor, you're a defense attorney, you're a civil litigator. Tell me about your thoughts on where things are at in the case in particular right now.
Well, first of all, just to shorthand, I think this prosecution of Flynn was about the most unethical thing I've ever seen. There's so many things wrong with it, it would take probably several of your shows to talk about them all. But suffice it to say, Barr is right on. This is dirty from start to finish. Every ethical norm was violated. Normally, if the government asked to withdraw a guilty plea in the interest of justice because there's been misconduct, the judge would grant it. Now, does he need to do it? I think he's checking that now. I don't think he needs to do it. I think it's up to his discretion. and you have a little bit of wrinkle because there was a delegation of powers to a special counsel. Now, the entity that is asking for the relief is not the special counsel himself. That said, Judge Sullivan is looking to Watergate for precedent. Watergate is not precedent because in that case, you didn't have rules and regulations. The Attorney General gave everything over to the special counsel and said, I'm keeping my hands off. In this case, in modern day, a special counsel is governed by rules and regulations which require that they adhere to government, Justice Department rules and regulations, and that the Justice Department still has oversight authority on a special counsel. That's the distinction between here and Watergate. That Department of Justice has said, we're exercising our oversight. We think this prosecution stinks from top to bottom. Now, that said, if I was a betting man, I'm saying that Judge Sullivan is looking closely at whether or not he's going to deny this motion. So
yeah.
I'm in Flynn's camp, but if Judge Sullivan wants to do it, I think he can do it.
Well, sure. The thing is that, and I think Professor Jonathan Turley pointed this out, that it seems like the judge is looking everywhere he can to find some justification not to dismiss this case. And whatever it is, he's bringing in a retired judge, even though there's an uncontested motion. He's doing pulling out all the stops, as it were, to try to make this the inevitable outcome, which is deeply concerning when if you're worried about civil liberties, not just now, but in the future.
Well, that's right. That's right. That's what he's doing. There has been so much evidence and argument put forth by Burr that shows that this thing stinks. Judge Sullivan is going the opposite way, and he's trying to build up his own coalition to say, no, here's the reason I'm not going to dismiss this thing. He's an interesting cat, Judge Sullivan. He definitely dances to his own drum. I predict that he's going to deny the motion. I don't think it's right, but he can do it. I think he's got the discretion. The only thing that I think the government has in its arrow in its quiver is this Brady versus Maryland issue, in which the government has determined that exculpatory information was not turned over to the defense. That's such a pure legal issue that I think that the appellate courts can overrule Judge Sullivan if they are so inclined. Normally, this thing is clearly a matter of discretion with the lower court, and normally that's not touched. That discretion is not overturned. But at least Burr has a hook to hang his hat on if Sullivan rules against him. So the thing may not be over.
I don't think it is.
Sullivan rules.
By no stretch of the imagination do I think Bill Barr, Attorney General, who I think has done an extraordinary job in that position and is a very savvy lawyer, I don't think there's any chance that he's going to let this go. John O'Connor, former federal prosecutor, author of the book Postgate, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Let's talk for a moment about how this investigation all came about, because that's what's so stunning. Now we hear about this unmasking situation with 39 Obama administration officials, including Vice President Joe Biden and President Obama, wanted Michael Flynn to be unmasked. We have seen this meeting in January 5th, 2017, just before Trump took office, where Sally Yates, then Deputy Attorney General, and James Comey and President Obama were in the Oval Office, and Sally Yates was stunned as Obama was asking Comey questions about this investigation that she had no idea about. And then, of course, you had the January 24th meeting, the now infamous meeting with the FBI agents and Michael Flynn that brought us to this point. Kind of walk us through how we got here and what disturbs you the most about it, John O'Connor.
Well, what disturbs me the most is, and I've written about this, and some of this is the result of partisan journalism, the Russian collusion investigation itself was a blatant abuse of power. And there were there's a lot of wrongdoing there. Let's put it that way. It was a phony entrapment investigation. They did everything wrong there. And they had to get rid of Flynn before he hit them. They knew, in terms of the incoming administration, there was one guy who knew where all the bodies were buried, and knew that this Russian investigation was phony, and that's General Flynn. And so that's why there was so much unmasking. The unmasking itself was not illegal, but it's an indication of wrongful intent, in my view. There was no real legitimate reason for 37 unmaskings other than a bunch of people trying to get this guy. Now, that's number one. So some of this was a cover-up for a phony investigation. Now, second cover-up, January 5th in the Oval Office, Obama and all the national security people, Susan Rice, James Comey, John Brennan, the whole crew, Joe Biden, they're all there. And according to Susan Rice's memo, the subject of the investigation was whether and to what extent they were going to give the incoming national security team of Trump all the information about their Russian collusion investigation. Now, wait a second. Why is that even an issue? Why would you be talking about whether and to what extent you're going to give information when you have to? And remember this is not a normal criminal investigation in which the Attorney General can keep things from the president or keep things at his discretion from other government agencies investigating. This is a counterintelligence investigation. The commander-in-chief is in charge of the counterintelligence investigation, aided by his national security team. It's a national security matter, and so they're meeting in the office of the Oval Office to determine to what extent they're going to obstruct the investigation that should be President Trump's and his national security team. In other words, they had the investigation, and we're not going to give them all the information. That's obstruction that makes Richard Nixon's obstruction look like child's play. You know, Nixon kept things from the Attorney General, the FBI, there's no doubt about it. Some things about the Mexican money trail was the main thing he did. It was a very minor thing, but it was a crime. Now, they're keeping from the president and his counterintelligence investigation information. Now, all of which they kept from him, I'm not sure, but it's pretty clear they kept an awful lot of it from him. Comey is still playing cat and mouse with Trump after Trump gets in office. He's not telling him the whole story. That started on January 5th. All this thing was a partisan conspiracy, mainly to cover up. You know, they'd already run a phony investigation. They got rid of Flynn. They were getting rid of Flynn. And now they're going to hide things from Trump and try to continue to go after Trump while he's in office. So there's so much dirt here, it boggles the imagination.
It is so abundantly obvious that this was a political prosecution from start to finish, political investigation. There was no sufficient predicate to investigate Michael Flynn in this way, contrary to what Andy McCabe and others are trying to say on CNN. John O'Connor, again, our guest, author of the book Postgate and former federal prosecutor. Unmasking, let's talk about that for a moment and kind of wind down the discussion of Michael Flynn. And I want to ask you briefly about Richard Burr. Define or describe what unmasking is and why we should be concerned about that.
Well, all these counterintelligence investigations are violations of the Bill of Rights. They're okay if it deals with foreign powers and foreign intelligence. Abraham Lincoln could free the slaves, even though it was unconstitutional, for national security purposes. So that overrides the Bill of Rights. That said, you shouldn't, if you unmask, you are now allowing the fruits of the search to be used against a citizen, not a foreign country. So you have to be very, very delicate when you do that. It should be for a legitimate national security purpose and not just to get your political enemies and not to prosecute them in some criminal action. So this is a misuse of the unmasking authority. It's not strictly prohibited by statute because it gives officials discretion, but it's dirty. It's dirty from start to finish. And so what I would say about the unmasking, Jimmy, is it is indicative of criminal intent. It is not in itself criminal. It's indicative. You're only doing this in order to get him and use this unmasking for a wrongful purpose. And that wrongful purpose is we've seen it carried out. The guy's convicted of a crime.
Let's play cut two, because the number one thing in my mind that strikes this as being troublesome is the fact that you have someone like Vice President Joe Biden, former Vice President Biden, involved as one of the individuals who was trying to get Michael Flynn's identity unmasked. Let's play cut two here, which is Biden on Sunday saying, "Oh, I only knew that they asked for an investigation."
I do want to ask you about Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor to President Trump, and the move by the Justice Department last week to dismiss the case against him for lying to the FBI. The president said yesterday that that move is justified because President Obama targeted Flynn. He called it, quote, the biggest political crime in U.S. history. Your former Senate colleague Charles Grassley has added that Flynn was entrapped and asked on the Senate floor, what did Obama and Biden know? When did they know it? So what did you know about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, and was there anything improper done?
I know nothing about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, number one. Number two, this is all about diversion.
I do want to press that. You say you didn't know anything about it, but you were reported to be at a January 5th, 2017 meeting where you and the president were briefed on the FBI's plan to question Michael Flynn over those conversations he had with the Russian ambassador Kislyak.
No, I thought you asked me whether or not I had anything to do with him being prosecuted.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was aware that they asked for an investigation, but that's all I know about it, and I don't think anything else.
All he knew was that they were trying to get an investigation, John O'Connor. Yet we know that's not true now, do we?
Right. Right. What I think Biden was worried about was what Flynn knew as well. Remember, these guys had to get Flynn before they got him. And Flynn not only knew where the bodies were buried on Russia, he knew where they were buried on Ukraine. If there's anybody around who knew about Ukrainian corruption, and it's more than just Biden's firing the prosecutor, that's a minor deal compared to the $1.8 billion he gave to the oligarchs who were represented by his son. But he was worried about Flynn, and so when you unmask, you get all the conversations that Flynn has engaged in. And when you do that, I think Biden was interested in his own hide there. So he's dirty too. The only thing I'd say about Joe is that maybe he's a taco or so short of a combination plate, and it's pretty hard to prosecute a guy that's not with it like he is.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way.
I think that is a nice way of putting it, John O'Connor. All right, let's shift gears here, and I appreciate your analysis there. Just a couple more minutes with you. Again, John O'Connor, author of the book Postgate, former federal prosecutor. North Carolina Senator Richard Burr had a warrant served for a search warrant yesterday, last night it appears, and it may be the case that his cell phone was taken by the FBI, according to some reports. It looks like as well that this is all tied to the notion of insider trading, that he attended this briefing, I think, in January about coronavirus, and then he went out in public and said there's nothing to be concerned about, was very clear on that, yet meanwhile he was selling stock in companies and buying new stock in other companies relative to this crisis and what he saw was going to be coming to fruition. What do you think's going on here?
Well, there are a couple people that sold stock, a couple other people, but they have pretty legitimate defenses, so to speak. The government shouldn't be preventing them from the regular trading of stocks. I think the Georgia Congresswoman has a decent defense. I think Dianne Feinstein might have sold some. Again, looks pretty innocent. Burr, it doesn't look so good for him, and I gotta say,
why is that?
It looks to me like he traded inside information and did exactly what he shouldn't do. He was front running the general public. I didn't know what he knew, and if I wanted to sell my stock, I wouldn't have the same information. So it's not fair. I gotta say, I hope he didn't do it. I hope he has a defense, but it doesn't look good to me. And you're right, Jimmy. Precisely what they want to get is something like the cell phone, because the only question here is his intent, his criminal intent, like I'm talking about, the unmasking evidence. They're looking for some indication that the reason he sold that stock was the information he learned from these briefings. If they can get his cell phone records, if they can find his broker, whoever it is that will have his own records, perhaps they can link that knowledge to the sale of the stock. Yeah. Otherwise, they know he has a defense in which he's saying, I never liked this stock anyway.
Yeah. Well, and one thing too, though, is that there was at least, I think, one recording or at least a meeting where he had with some high-level donors or something of the sort, and he gave them a more honest perspective that there's real reason to be concerned about this. So he was telling certain limited folks that could get access to him, and he had the information himself and was acting in accordance with that. While in, I think, an op-ed as well as on TV news and so forth, he was saying there's nothing to worry about.
Well, there you go. That's pretty good evidence of intent.
Yeah.
And in that call to his donors, if he does talk in any way, especially about the effect on the markets, that to me will be a huge tell. For his sake, I hope he didn't do that, but for the prosecutor's sake, I think that's pretty darn good evidence.
Let me
and
ask.
He was not telling the truth to the public. So, and that's okay to say you want to keep the public calm if you think that's the right thing, but you shouldn't be buying and selling stock on that basis.
Let me ask you one final question, John O'Connor, the role of criminal intent, because I think in particular during the impeachment stuff that the Democrats were trying to do, especially the one where they actually moved forward and brought it to a trial in the Senate, they seem to be discounting any indications of whether or not criminal intent was necessary to demonstrate. When we're talking any of these sorts of cases of law, or even in the case of impeachment, where they're trying to say, oh, he broke the law in some way, what is the role and significance of criminal intent, and how do you determine that?
Well, it's everything. I told people when I was a prosecutor that the hardest thing in the world to do in a white-collar case is you have to prove criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury. And so what prosecutors would do, and they do it now, is there's an instruction that says you can't look inside somebody's head and pull out his software. They don't say that. The instruction says you can't look inside somebody's head. So you got to look at all the facts and circumstances to determine intent. So I think in the case of Burr, I think you've got some evidence of intent, and that's precisely what the FBI is looking for. In Trump's situation, I think intent was also at issue. It isn't a strict liability crime. If the guy, I don't know what particular crime they were looking at, but if a guy's innocent and does something that is objectively wrong, that's not criminal. You and I and other people do things wrong all the time or mistaken about a fact. That doesn't mean we're trying to commit a crime. So you got to look at intent. And that's why, getting back to the Flynn thing, the unmasking is such powerful evidence in my view, because it starts the chain of criminal intent on Flynn. And there's a lot of criminal intent here involved. All these discussions, and of course Peter Strzok has given us a treasure trove with his text message.
Make no mistake about that. So much that they actually made a play of Strzok and Page, which was pretty entertaining. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. Look it up. All right, John O'Connor, check out his book, Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deepthroat, Covered Up Watergate, and Began Today's Partisan Advocacy Journalism. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really good insights.
Jimmy, it's been a blast.
Same here. Thank you, sir. Once again, John O'Connor joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, former federal prosecutor, now private attorney. Great to be with you today. Just a couple of thoughts. I don't want to get too much into the whole jobs discussion that we had with Mark Cuban earlier, but I think, and we talked about this a little bit with John O'Connor in the beginning of the conversation, which is that I think, as John does, and I disagree with Mark Cuban in this regard, that government is not capable of effectively creating jobs programs or being innovative or determining what jobs are going to make a meaningful impact in the economy, for starters. I also think that the idea of stimulating demand, you're really, and I didn't point this out, but you're really just reallocating money that's already in the economy. You're not creating new wealth or value. And this is a fundamental point I really wanted to get with Mark Cuban, was that in an economy in the private sector, you are actually creating things of meaningful value and creating wealth. A government jobs program doesn't create wealth. It just doesn't. The government has very few areas in which they have contributed to wealth increases in society through some of the technologies that have been innovated, usually for defense purposes, and then the private sector has put them to use for various things. Sometimes NASA's come up with things like Velcro that we've put to use. So there are some instances where government has helped to create something of value that can then be turned into wealth-building products and services. But the government doesn't do that on a regular basis. I don't think the government's prescient enough or capable of doing that, of effectively creating any sort of job scheme. Now, the idea of, well, we need to do something different, you can't have companies step in quickly enough to take action. I don't think the government can take action quickly enough. We saw the unemployment website just tank multiple times in various states. It was slow moving. I know someone, she was trying to sign up for unemployment, took her a week just to be able to get that process going. And then you want to have the influx of millions of applications in the federal government, then you have to suss through them. And then you have to train the people, and how quickly will you be able to train them? So there are a heck of a lot of challenges that come to that kind of a program that I just don't see how the U.S. federal government is capable of doing it, setting aside the question of whether or not it should. There is the issue, the question of what should government do, what's its role? I think the government's role is not that. That's the dogma issue that Mark Cuban was identifying before. The idea of sort of ideology and perspective on the role of government. Then on the other hand, what we've got is the question of practicality and whether or not it can be done. And therefore, from a pragmatic standpoint, should be done. And on both counts, I say no. But we never have enough time, but there was a heck of a fun conversation with Mark Cuban, and very informative as well with John O'Connor. Haven't talked with either of those gentlemen before and interviewed either of them, and it was great conversations that we had, to be sure. Well, that is it for us today, but tomorrow we're going to be back focusing Free to Choose Friday on the problem of poverty. Special guest Dr. Walter E. Williams will be among those who join us. We're going to dive into what's going on with poverty in America today and how the free market can address these challenges. So much coming up tomorrow. Do not miss Free to Choose Friday. My thanks to Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire, for working the Matouche magic again today, our partners at the Washington Examiner, and you for watching. Be sure to subscribe at Jimmy at the Crossroads on the YouTube channel, and God bless America.